And one piece of interesting advice I got a while ago was when you're in there setting the goals, you should make them as low as possible without that you could almost couldn't say with a straight face. So like if you can get to that point where you're just like 2, you're just and see if they'll, will they bite? And then you set that kind of like, maybe you have some buffer in there where you can exceed that.
Here's what go-to-market teams are missing: proof. That's what I think of every morning when I fire up LinkedIn and scroll through boring manifestos and endless lukewarm takes. Opinions are cheap and proof is gold. I'm Mark Huber, and this is The Proof Point, a show from UserEvidence that helps go-to-market teams find ideas, get frameworks, and swap tactics. Each episode includes an unfiltered discussion with the biggest names in B2B SaaS to help find the proof points that I'm in search of. You'll learn from sales, marketing, and customer success leaders in the trenches, where I ask them, seriously, what actually works for you? One of our guests actually told me this felt like we were having drinks at a bar and talking about work without all the BS. And that pretty much sums it up and why I'm so excited for this new show. Join us every other week for new episodes. Hot takes, always welcome. On today's episode of The Proof Point, we went deep on proving marketing's impact internally. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart right now because it's something that I'm working through as a first-time VP of marketing. So when I invited these 3 guests, I was super excited to record because they schooled me on this. First up, Pranav Piyush. He's the CEO of Paramark, and he's got an interesting vantage point because he talks to so many marketing leaders about this topic. Next up, Megan Boone. She's the VP of demand generation at Redis. She was a little jet lagged, but she held her own here. She had just gotten back from her world tour in India and Singapore. And then last on this episode, I don't really need to introduce him because I co-hosted a podcast called Demand Gen U for 65 episodes, I believe. Don't quote me on that. He is a fractional CMO and marketing consultant to B2B SaaS companies, Jason Widup. This was a fun one. Enjoy. So Jason, why do you think that so many B2B marketing leaders and teams have a hard time proving their impact?
Okay, so this is like a 3-pronged problem. The first thing is we don't know how to set goals. If we're only setting goals with things that can be measured, we're just going to miss out on a whole swath of things that could move the needle and help us prove value. So that's the first one, but that kind of leads into the second main point, which is about trust. So like to be able to do some of the things that are not measurable, you've got to have the trust of your company leadership. So if they don't trust you, they're going to be very honed in on those metrics, the things that can show KPI movement. And so you're going to miss out there too. So those are, 2 of the things. And then the third thing, which actually you helped me better understand when we worked together, is internal marketing and the importance of that. So I think a lot of times, like my specific experience is like, well, I don't want to bother everybody with all this stuff that we're doing, but that's the opposite of how you should think, right? How else are they going to know that we're targeting this segment over here? They'll never see that. Or we're doing this email. They might never, ever see that. And so just the importance of internal marketing to help prove, the value of what you're doing as well. So that's kind of, those are the 3 areas I think we go wrong.
So before I let Megan and Pranav chime in and basically respond to that answer, Jason, I'm proud of you because we've recorded a couple podcasts together before. And one of the things that you struggled with before was you would name how many points that you would make. And then you would either respond back with 1 fewer or like 2 more. So you stuck to 3. So I'm proud.
That's, it's the clearer head.
So Megan, how does that stack up to like what you think really causes B2B marketing leaders to struggle with this?
Yeah, well, I love that answer, first of all. And I also love the measurable goals piece here and aiming for, answering the number of questions that you say you're going to answer. I think that's an awesome KPI. But Jason, I will challenge you. I agree fully with the two second points. But for the first one, I actually do think you can measure almost everything we're doing. I just don't think it's directly measurable. And so I know Pranav has some great points with, marketing mix modeling, but also just finding what that right KPI is. It's not always going to be a direct conversion from what you're doing, but I do think that you can measure the impact of marketing through a KPI in honestly anything you're doing.
So first off, like we broke the first rule that Mark told us before we started recording, which is we're not going to talk about the 3Ms, the marketing mix model and stuff. Right? Right off the bat. Yeah. No, but I was having a discussion with Bill McKitis recently, the ex-CMO of Slack and Zendesk. And in the first 5 minutes of my conversation, he was like, Pranav, the days of marketing is not measurable are over. You can measure everything. Now, the challenge is the cost of measuring might be too high, and we can talk about that, right? It's not always accessible for every brand or every startup of every size, and it may not be worth it, right? The juice has to be worth the squeeze. And so there's other nuances of whether you should try to measure something or not. It is all measurable, but, it comes with a cost. Now, one thing that I think about is even the wording around proving marketing's impact internally comes from the perspective of a defensive mindset, right? Which is I'm having to justify, I'm having to prove, I'm having to defend, I'm having to come from a position of weakness. And that I think is the ultimate sort of, I would say, sadness of the state of marketing right now, where I think if we reframe the conversation to be much more positive and focus on, hey, how are we going to help the business grow? And now you're talking about placing bets and saying this is a capital allocation decision of I'm going to invest more in this or more in this or more in this. And it's a portfolio of bets that help you figure out the next level of growth. And then the whole conversation changes, right? I don't care about proving impact. I care about growing the business. And that's coming from a position of strength. So I know that was not your question, but I would say, that I think might help marketers in thinking about, pushing the ball forward.
I don't know if you can convince me that everything is measurable. I honestly don't. There's just so many little nuances that happen in somebody's journey that I just don't believe are measurable. I mean, the simplest one is me putting out an organic LinkedIn post about something. I could look and see who might have tactically engaged with it, right? Or commented, but I can't see the number of people it was impressed to that actually took something away from it. And then that actually led them to either getting a half step, to come, maybe they didn't even visit my website. It's a half step there. And then they saw me somewhere else, and that was a third of a step. And then they took whatever the remaining fraction is. There's no math in this episode. So whatever that gets them the rest of the way there to my website. Or I just have a conversation with somebody, you know what I mean? So I'm having lots of conversations. I find somebody at an event, and I'm like, oh, hey, did you check out, one of my clients, X, Y, or Z? And these are obviously smaller scale things, so the larger scale things probably can measure, you can look at an impact study, you can, do things like that. But these kind of smaller things, it's kind of like, these little things just build up to the point where you're like, well, okay, let me go to the website. Okay, let me check them out. Let me get a demo. So yeah, I don't know. I need more convincing.
I love that, Jason. I love it.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, and I'll kind of back up what I said, which you can measure. It's just you're not going to know the individual impact of every individual tactic and thing you're doing, but objectively from a marketing strategy perspective, am I spending my time in the right way? Yeah, I do think we can find the right KPIs for that. But to your point, an organic post, a conversation at a networking event, no way.
If you take a step back and think about this, right, Jason? So what you're talking about is what influences a human being to take that next action? Mm-hmm. And what influences somebody to listen to this and go oh, I'm going to go check out Redis, or I'm going to go check out Peak B2B, or I'm going to go check out Paramark. And that is, to your point, immeasurable, because until Elon Musk makes Neuralink into a marketing attribution tool, that's not happening, right? So until we can read people's minds, there's nothing to measure. There's nothing tangible. If you look at the words, I care a lot about the meaning of the words, right? Measuring means that, okay, there's something physical that you're trying to, or something tangible that you're trying to measure. And there isn't anything around that. So you're absolutely right about that. And it's a little bit unfortunate that the word measurement is used the way it is. I think model is a much better way of looking at it, right? You're modeling a reality, or you're creating a sub-model of what the actual reality is, right? And that's why attribution models, marketing mix models, they're all trying to model what might actually be happening in reality, but it's not reality. It's just a model. It's a toy airplane. And it's the best representation that we have of what might be happening in reality. And I do think that when you look at it from that perspective, you can actually create some very realistic models. And they're never reality, right? And this is why I talk a lot about experimentation. And that is the truest way of getting to cause and effect, right? And that's where you're trying to get to like precision on, I did something, did it have an impact? And then you get into sample sizes and statistical validity and all the jargon around that. But there's truth in what you're saying, but I think I'll also challenge you and say that shouldn't be an excuse to not to try to model the best, version of reality that you can.
So Pranav, can you, asking for a friend, AKA me, can you just explain at a high level what marketing mix modeling is? And
yeah, I love that.
By asking for a friend, I might be asking for Jason and myself.
It's, it's interesting. It was invented in, I think, the 70s or the 80s by people at P&G and I believe MIT or Harvard, I forget, but one of these like larger institutions. And the problem that they were trying to solve was pretty simple. If you think about it, there was no digital back then, right? It was TV, radio, newspaper, and, retail stores and in-store promotions. And so what these smart people at P&G and these, universities figured out is what we actually need to do is look at our historical data, literally in spreadsheets, the version of spreadsheets that existed back then, and said, every time we have increased our investment in radio in this geography, it has led to an increase in in-store sales by X%. Or every time we have reduced our linear TV in this state, it has reduced our in-store sales by Y%. So all you're doing is looking at the trends of investment and the impact on your sales numbers. Now, when you do this across multiple channels, across tens of years of data, that's basically a marketing mix model. And you don't have to do that in a spreadsheet. You can do that through, now machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of other stuff, but that's what you're doing. You're understanding the relationship between investments over a period of time and the impact on your sales. It gets a little bit more interesting in B2B because you don't have sales, you have something else that's leading metric, all that fun stuff, but we can talk about that.
And the volume is lower. So it's a little bit harder to get all that like rich data unless you're spending a lot of money and having a lot of different experiments like you mentioned too. So I think that's important. But yeah, that's one of the things I've always run into with just B2B in general is just like the low volume of activities we actually have to create a model with, and like how significant statistically can that be given those low volumes. And so I was working with one client that got just an F ton of visits to their website. I can't remember if this is a PG or not. So visits to their website.
You used to let it rip on demand.
And I know, yeah, owned it down. And they have a conversion on their website, right? So they convert to free trial on the website. And it was just like so nice to finally have all of this data and we could see like where people were coming from and where, and who converted. And then not only that, but then who converted from the trial to paid and really kind of hone in that way. But most of the places I've worked, the volume is just not quite there from a B2B perspective to be able to get really confident with, sometimes you think you'll see something pop and you just know you're just like, well, it's clear it's working. But then other times, if it's not clear, I find that the volume problem to be a problem.
I think that's super fair. I've used some tools too. I talked to my team about this where, claim statistical significance and we're talking like 10 form fills versus 8. Oh man, that's really, I don't think we can say that this is statistically significant.
So Jason, I'm going to have you tell a story real quick before we bring it back on the rails. So we've already broken one rule, which I asked and encouraged, marketing mix modeling, attribution. One of my favorite stories of many that you have told me over the years is what you learned at Tableau about attribution. So can you school us on that?
Yeah. And that was a place where we did have a lot of volume and we had a lot of spend going through marketing. And so we were like, no tool that exists out there is going to be good enough or accurate enough for Tableau. And we're an analytics platform anyway, so shouldn't we be doing this ourselves? And so I hired some fancy consultants We actually hired a PhD like professor of this stuff to come and advise. We built attribution modeling based on like Markov chain modeling. I can't even tell you what that is now. It's just another fancy word, I think, for like, look back at what happened before. And what it's probably just a fancy word for, I don't know, marketing mix modeling, but it sounded good because it had a guy's name on it, right? So like, where are you going to use the Markov chain modeling? If you don't know what that is, this is too sophisticated for you. It was an easy way for me to sell it up my own chain. But no, we spent a good $250,000 on building this model, refining it, building the tools inside of Tableau so we could visualize it and see it. And then at the end of the day, it basically just kind of mirrored last touch attribution. It's just kind of like, well, I guess that's an experiment, an experiment for us to see what we could do and if we could learn anything more. But yeah, it was not a success, I would say.
That is, Jason, I think that is the unfortunate reality of most marketing. Well, a couple of things, right? One is, I think you did justice by saying analytics and attribution are two different things, right? So Tableau as a marketing analytics company, and, why are you having to go hire an attribution provider? There's some inherent sort of interestingness to that point. Then the second point of like, you talked about Markov chains, and there's so much jargon, like data science jargon in this industry, that we all don't talk about to each other in simple, plain English. And therefore, I think it becomes useless because the translation from data science to marketing is like impossible. And I would say like the winning player in this category has to break through that. If you can't explain it to a CMO or a VP of marketing, you're not going to win, right?
Yeah.
And the question about that specific project comes down to the data that was fed into that model. Because that is the actual issue, right? Which is, we work with customers all the time, and the data that we receive has lots of issues and lots of cleanup that we have to do for customers. And without that, right, none of it really matters. And if you're only looking at touch data and click data, you're kind of stuck with the last click model anyway. So it's a very fair observation. I think a lot of companies struggle with exactly that.
So Jason and Pranav, you're at like sitting in different seats at the table. You're talking with other marketing leaders, but right now in your current role, like Megan, you are a marketing leader right now. So how do you have these conversations internally? And then Jason and Pranav, you've both been in that seat before, so I'd love to see how it compares to what you did.
Yeah, honestly, I think most attribution is total bullshit, to be honest. And I think it's kind of a breath of fresh air the way I communicated internally, which is that transparently, look, it's not a science. And I think we can try to figure out like how much money are we spending and is it influencing the right things. But I think coming to the table with, hey, it's not, I think Jason, you made this point, Pranav, you made this point, like, I'm not defending my investments. How can I grow this company and what's working and how do we get the right feedback loops going? And I think approaching it that way was just like, hey, we just need as much data as we can get. How do we get feedback? Because we want to make my job is to make the sales team as effective as possible. They're not successful, but I'm generating leads, I'm generating pipeline. Like, doesn't matter. I'm not going to go around and like celebrate that internally. So if the sales team is crushing it, I'm crushing it. I know I'm doing my job well. And coming and saying it from that perspective, like, we're a partner, we're only successful as one team, I think is the best way to communicate that internally.
One of the things that's super important is, especially like if you're taking a new marketing leadership role, is you want some quick wins first that are measurable. So like, you don't want, maybe the first thing you don't do, come in and say, we got to do a bunch of out-of-home ads, like the things that are just like, our problem is we don't have enough billboards. Like, so don't walk in with that, but maybe walk in with just trying to understand, okay, where are some challenge spots? Which of these areas can I tackle and have visible results that I feel confident in, that I can move the needle on? And that will start to build that trust so that you can go back and say, like, billboards, we don't have enough of these, or whatever your kind of maybe harder to measure play might be. So yeah, I think it's important, when you start out, you do have to have some KPI measurable wins, to begin with. And so that, and then I just go back to the trust thing. And I would try and work that out before you even accept a new job. So spend time with the CEO or whoever it is that you're going to be reporting to. Ask them, like, can we, meet in person before we take this job any further? Spend a couple of hours with them, talk about philosophical things in marketing or in your life or whatever. And just, are we on the same page? And can we start from a position of trust, or can it get there? Because people that either don't understand marketing or that you can't develop a trusting relationship with, it's just going to be like really hard. Even if you do have some of those numerical wins under your belt, I think it's still going to be a hard thing to just be able to do the right mix of things if you don't have that in place.
I love what both of you said. I'm going through this right now. I have a little bit of money to spend on our own marketing, right? It's like, okay, how are we going to spend this money? Am I going to create a podcast? We do have one. Are we going to spend more on content on our blog? Are we going to spend more on my organic social? Are we going to spend more on sponsoring, communities and events? Or do I finally start advertising, right? Do I do CMO dinners? And the reality is, until you've reached a few $1 million in revenue, a lot of that decision-making better come from the founders about this is going to sound super weird coming from a measurement, provider, based on your gut feel and what you're seeing day to day talking to customers. Because guess what? Or whoever is kind of in a customer-facing role, right? In those early days, because you are talking to customers and prospects every day. And that is data. It may not look like data because it's not in a spreadsheet, but that is data. And you're making those data-informed decisions about where you're going to invest your dollars. And so data doesn't always come in the form of like first click, last click, spreadsheet data. It comes in many different ways. And you can still make smart decisions based on those conversations you're having with customers.
All right, asking another question for a friend that is me, and I know that Evan and Ray listen to the proof point, so I'm giving away the answers of the test here. Pranav, how do you go about having those types of conversations with co-founders? Because I myself at times, I'm big on qualitative feedback and email replies and LinkedIn comments from people that actually matter in your ICP and all these other forms as a way to fill in some of the gaps that I might not be able to quantify, but how do you best go about those conversations?
I mean, a little bit of a cheat code on my end, right? Because my co-founders are living and breathing the same problem that we talk about, right? So they understand marketing measurement pretty well. And we can see that when we invest more in LinkedIn organic, I actually look at our impression counts on a daily basis for my profile, for the company pages, and see the correlation with those with our website visits. We don't do any advertising. We don't do any SEO. So the only thing that's driving website visits is our LinkedIn content. There's nothing else to it. So it's pretty simple for us to have that conversation, right? Now, when we layer on more complicated stuff, it becomes harder. And we also have to be real, right? I can go look at our podcast and it's a great podcast, but hey, our distribution is not there yet. We started 3 months ago and we've got, 15 episodes. So if I become like one of those folks who's like, oh yeah, podcast, like it's going to crush it, let's just keep going. It's a little bit of an intellectually dishonest, argument. It's like, it's a seed, it's a bet. It's going to take a couple of years to play out. And that has to be how we think about the investment. It is not going to drive 90% of our pipeline right now. It might drive 10 or 20% of our pipeline 2 years from now. And so as long as you think about, okay, then you make a conscious decision of, am I going to continue investing an hour every 2 weeks into that thing because I'm expecting results 2 years from now? I'm comfortable making that decision, but if something changes in the business, we might have to change that, calculus.
Megan, is that how you think about it in your role?
I think there's a couple interesting points that Pranav made that really resonated with me. One is finding what the metrics are and the internal story you need to tell. Mark, same for you. If you're getting, anecdotal feedback from folks, like that is attribution. I think that is telling the story. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be in a Tableau dashboard, although still not a Tableau fan. Sorry, Jason.
No.
True to thought spot forever.
I don't think Jason is either. So
yeah.
Totally fair. But you got to do some work to figure out what is that story you're trying to tell and what are those metrics, but then also like lining up that budget, and everyone's at a different point in their journey. So there's no, I don't think, perfect math for how much should be, direct attribution, direct pipeline generating, and how much should be big bets. But I love the concept that resonates the most with me is like the hamster wheel versus the flywheel. If you're over-indexed on pipeline generation, like that's not really our jobs, to be perfectly honest. It's demand generation, which is, going to be different. One, you're kind of fuzzy here, but how do we get off the like every quarter feels super painful to how do we start to make it easier? That's the flywheel. So to Pranav's point, and hey, I'm going to do this podcast. No, it's not going to generate pipeline this quarter, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to start to invest. I'm going to build an audience and make sure I'm selling that internally the right way so people understand why you're doing it. They have the trust that you're doing it, and then you can show the momentum along the way. So it's just about finding like the right balance, but you still need to show up, quarter over quarter with the wins on the board. So you need to do both at the same time.
The product you're marketing is really important, I think, as well, right? So if you don't have product market fit, there's really no amount of marketing that can fix that problem. So I think that's another thing to look at, is just like make sure we've got actually a solid product that we're putting money behind here, and that we're actually having wins with customers. And then another little cheat thing that I've learned as well with founders is if you can figure out something that they're passionate about as well and mix that in some way. So it's like if they are passionate about posting on LinkedIn, but they're not there yet, cool. Hey, this is part of our strategy, you getting onto LinkedIn. Or if they're not, then definitely not including that. If they're like, really, I hate LinkedIn and then don't come to them like, all right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to get on LinkedIn every day and you're going to post something. So I think finding that and just kind of like prodding and searching and kind of figuring out what are things that and pushing the envelope a little bit that they, could be comfortable with or could be interested in. Because then if they're invested in it too, it's more likely to succeed, or at least you might get a little bit more leeway on the timing or budget or something like that.
I think one thing I was going to add here, Mark, I know you're going to go on here. At the earlier stages, you have to concentrate your bets more. And I think a lot of us end up sort of trying a whole bunch of different things. And it actually hurts because it's the operational cost, all that fun stuff, but also for you to see impact and for you to do your best job, you have to concentrate your bets to be able to see the impact, right? So an example of this is if I spread my, advertising dollars across LinkedIn, Meta, Twitter, and I'm just making this up, TikTok. Nobody's probably doing TikTok and B2B. Maybe somebody is. And, you spend 10K, 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 and, your baseline is like nothing. It's going to be much harder for you to tell what's working, what's not working. But if you take all 40 of that, put it into one channel for a month, and that gives you more breathing room to see the impact from that channel before you gotta go and try something else. So I do believe in the idea of concentrated bets at the earliest stages for sure.
I love that. So maybe we use that as the example. How do you have that type of conversation, Pranav, especially when leadership and the CEO might not come from a marketing background? Like, do you go about that conversation any differently?
I think so. If I were doing this again, right? If I were to step back into a marketing leadership role, here's what I would do. The first thing is understanding the baseline of the business. What that means is, however you define it, hand raisers, leads, qualified opportunities, whatever your leading metric is for the business, what has the actual growth rate and volumes been week over week, month over month for the last 12 months? To me, that is the starting point. That's your baseline. Now the question is, you're often going to see when you come into that role that somehow the number that's being forecasted for the next 12 months looks dramatically higher than the number over the last 12 months, right? And so the first conversation that I would have is like, why are you doing that? And that conversation is probably more useful than the conversation about the bets you're going to make. Because if you can't align on what is fundamentally going to be different between the last 12 months and the next 12 months, right, to have that inflection point, you're never going to get on the same page. So right-sizing the forecast or the plan, whatever you use for the internal terminology, is step one. Step two then is to say, okay, like if the natural trajectory of the business is this way, right, we're going from this point to this point, and then you're projecting to go and have an inflection point, you realize that you're not going to get there with the same budget you had for the last 12 months. So what is the additional budget that you're going to invest? Let's have a conversation. And are we all on the same page? Are we going to invest another $1 million? Then I'm going to talk about, okay, 70% of that budget is going to go towards the same activities that we did in the last 12 months because, hey, it did get you this pipeline or this like last 12 months. We're going to take the remaining 30%, We're going to put them on those additional bets. Oh, and then I need to figure out where those additional bets are. And that's a conversation that you're having. I'm listening to the market. I'm listening to prospects. I'm listening to customers. I've done my research on where they hang out. I've done my research on what messages they care about. And, that's going to give you, here are the 3 bets, 5 bets that we're going to make. By the way, 4 out of those 5 bets are going to fail. Only one is going to work. This is statistically the answer, right?
Hopefully.
If you go talk to, exactly, hopefully. If you go talk to Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Booking.com and you ask them, how many of your experiments actually work? They'll tell you the answer is somewhere between 10 to 20%, right? So are you really going to be better than those large companies and exactly what's going to work? No, right? So that's the framework of the conversation, right? You understand the baseline, you understand the additional investments to inflect that baseline, and you split your budget up into business as usual and experiments.
So it sounds like a big part of that is setting expectations. Is that fair to say?
Oh, totally.
And I think that's something that I've struggled with at times too. So Jason, I'm curious, and Megan as well, how you've gone about trying to set realistic expectations on timing, success rate, like you name it.
Yeah. It's just gotten I've just learned lesson after lesson over time. And I've been doing this for a long time. And so founders have to do this too. You've got to be wildly optimistic about things, but also intelligently pessimistic at the same time. And so, because you don't want to just oversell yourself and then you're just kind of yes, there's no way this can't work. Because I've done that. I mean, you've even seen me say that before, Mark, this is going to work 100%. I'm confident about it. And then it just fails miserably because you just really don't know, even if you kind of represent your ICP or marketers selling to marketers. And it's still.
I mean, there were also times, we think back to the metadata days, where there were things that someone had suggested, maybe it was you, maybe it was me, and we actually didn't have very much confidence in it. And those were also the ones that were more successful than the things that we were super confident in.
That's true. Yeah. So you never can really understand, you never really can tell what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so, yeah, I just think the trying thing and trying to do things so you can do more things, trying to do things as an MVP. And so if you just take a subset of your audience and do it in kind of a half-baked way, and then see if that works, you can kind of maybe do more of those things to get to that final point of all right, we're going to then really go big with this thing once we at least test the waters. And I think also just talking to people, I think Pranav, you mentioned this, just talking to people and talking it through and talking to people in your ICP that are friendly with you or customers and just running it by them and seeing what they think and how they could even improve your idea, I think is helpful too.
Yeah, I think having kind of a council of inputs, if you will, but then also in terms of setting expectations, depending who you're setting expectations with, is this above or below? Above, I think you don't want to oversell it. I kind of like to set the bar at a healthy level. I try to overachieve it, but also make sure that people understand what their role is as well. And it depends on the level of investment. If, for me, for example, we have a pretty pricey global org show we're investing in. And so I need a lot from other teams. And so the more other folks feel involved, the more comfortable I feel selling it up too. And then the other one is when you're talking down to your team, some advice I've been given that I love, and I try to internalize this quite a bit because I have very ambitious goals that a lot of people will say absolutely no way, you sound crazy, is winning is contagious. So you don't want it to be easy. You want to set the bar so people feel like they're striving, but people need wins to gain momentum. And so that's what I think about selling goals to the team. You need to make sure it's achievable and they get that momentum. So they want to do more. They want to keep moving that bar up. But then if you're selling it to the executive team, they need to have some buy-in. If it's something small, you can kind of downsell it. But again, I like to under promise, over deliver as much as possible.
Yeah, one piece of interesting advice I got a while ago was when you're in there setting the goals, you should make them as low as possible without that you could almost couldn't say with a straight face. So if you can get to that point where you're just 2, you're just and see if they'll, will they bite? And then you set that kind of maybe you have some buffer in there where you can exceed that. But yeah, try and do it where you're just almost couldn't do it with quite a straight face. Or if they challenge you on it, you'd have almost a hard time defending it. And then there's nowhere to go but up. But yeah, it's definitely not this is an art more than a science.
I'll give you a fun story on this one. I was at a business and we completely, I was a marketing leader and a product leader at the time, and we changed something fundamental about the product, okay, in a way that was going to just dramatically change the buyer experience, the pricing, the packaging, the whole thing. And running it as an experiment, even though I'm a data guy, would have been really painful and hard because of the number of changes that we had to make, okay? And so we were like, my CEO and I, we sat down like, we're just going to do it. We're going to do it, and then we'll figure out how to iterate from whatever the new baseline is. We did it. It happened to coincide perfectly with us getting acquired. And you can imagine what that led to, right? Given that the acquiring company acquired this product that had a pretty, stable baseline. And then now there was a completely new set of expectations to manage. And not running it as an experiment was a horrible idea in hindsight, right? So yes, it would have been painful, but that's also the nature of the environment that you're in, right? How risk averse is the environment, or how risk friendly is the environment, who the ultimate sort of decision maker is, what the board is betting on, right? All of these things will help you have that conversation internally. And you would use a very different argument with my CEOs, like, hey, let's go, versus the new acquiring company and the board that's like, hey, we got to have everything, all the T's crossed and I's dotted before we launch this thing. So I think there's no easy answer. You have to know the people in the room and the people who are sitting around the board table making the decisions before you can have that conversation.
One of the things that I'm kind of feeling right now, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, is when you are investing, in marketing, let's say it's $1 in September, when can you start to see the impact of said dollar? Like, how do you even go about that conversation? Because that's something where I feel like I, try to set expectations around and probably am not doing the best job of it.
That's a tough one. Yeah. I mean, I think, some things are going to have a more immediate impact, or should. Like, we're going to run these demo ads, and hopefully that'll have. But I think I guess it's like putting yourself in the shoes of the recipient in some way. It's like, well, how would this ultimately move me? And if it's something like a podcast, for example, this is going to be one of probably many things that they encounter about your brand and your company that's going to ultimately lead them to. And
let's use a hypothetical, aka a very real example. It's sponsoring events. So use that as the lens.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting there is, you can often get a list of the companies that are attending, and just take a little gander, beforehand, how many of these companies visited our website, afterwards, how many companies visited the website. But event is another one of those things where, I mean, depending on how you're attending these events, and I know you're not boothing it up, I think you're doing more of like a meeting people and maybe doing some dinners and that kind of thing. And those could have fairly immediate impacts, and they're fairly measurable because exactly the dinners, for example, who was there, who you invited, who was there, what happens to them afterwards. People you meet, you probably will kind of remember and see if they're, if something happens afterwards. But booth presence at an event is a whole different ball game. A lot of people are too, like one of my clients, they're in the association space, and man, it feels like this space is light years behind. And so they are big event people. And so I come in, I'm like, what are all these events we're doing? These don't work. And sure enough, it is where literally more than half of our pipeline, probably like 70, maybe 60, 70% of it comes from literally booth at an event. And so another learning for me. But so yeah, some of those, the booth, somebody sign up, grab some money out of a money bag, and, you get to sign up if you sign up for a demo right here or whatever, your gimmick is to try and get people there. That can have an immediate, but again, others of it is just, okay, I saw them there, and then they see another thing, like an ad, and then they see an email, and then they see a post on LinkedIn from a founder. It's just all those things make them feel like, oh, they keep reminding them subconsciously or consciously about you and your product. And so they can have really long-term effects, but 3 months, 3 months-ish, 3 months, to maybe see some results from that. Because after that, are they really going to remember that they saw you at the booth? I don't know.
Yeah, I think to Jason's point, I completely agree with that. And I myself have been really surprised with the performance of events. And I'm in a developer-led space now, and they crush. People love events. And so we lead in heavily. But it's about setting expectations. Like what is the objective of doing this? Is it brand awareness? Is it relationship building? Then it's going to take a super long time to see that ROI. But if it's, for us, we do a lot of pipeline acceleration. So we just look at pipe in the room. Like how much pipeline did we engage with at this dinner, at this happy hour? And then did we see a conversion rate differential? Usually we do, by the way. Our events, we have a nice model. The ops team has done this well, where if they come to at least one event, we close twice as fast as if they don't. And we're like, cool, get as many people to events as possible. But it's just what is the purpose of the event? And then I think that can help you. But it should usually be pretty fast with events. It's big upfront investment, but it should come out quickly.
Did you say pipe in the room?
Yes.
That's a new measure. I like that. All right, pipe in the room. That's the new key.
Pipe in the room. It's a really easy way for like the top of funnel. If this is a pipeline acceleration program, like was there pipe in the room? Now you have to balance it with numbers versus dollars. We've got some really big swing deals, so you can like really crush with some of those. Oh, it was actually 2. That's great.
I like that new metric for money.
Yeah, there you go. I knew you wanted more metrics. So,
Mark, so my take on this is if it doesn't work within the first month, it's never going to work. So I take an extreme point of view on this, and it's never worked. It's never going to work. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't invest in it. I'm just saying that whatever you did, either it had impact that you can viscerally feel right now, or it didn't. And I'll tell you, like I've sponsored events when we had, 5 figures in revenue, and I'm thinking back to like January, and we sponsored this thing, and it was a small token amount of sponsorship, but I had pipeline worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars within the first like month of that from that event, right? I did another sponsorship, and again, same exact deal. And again, it's easy for us because we are so new in the market. When you get to tens of millions in revenue, and you're now starting to think about, okay, where do I invest, and do I do do I invest more in events? It gets harder, but at the same time, whoever's organized that event should have clear evidence of, are there people who are interacting with your brand at that event in a way that is authentic and legitimate? And why would it take anything longer than like a week for you to see that in your CRM? That just means that somebody messed up something in terms of the operational logistics of setting up that event. That's my take. And again, like if it didn't work in the first month, why will it work 6 months from now? Why will it work 3 months from now? Like, I don't buy that.
So Pranav, you're going to see me at the event that I'm talking about, and we'll see if it's the same answer after this. We're getting close here on time. Megan, don't forget your story. I'm going to make sure you finish last here and then bring it back. So Pranav and Jason first, what's like the biggest mistake that you've made in your career on this topic that you'd be willing to share for, new marketing leaders, just as far as advice goes?
I mean, I guess I'd say, and this is it's a life learning experience too, but just having faith and trust in yourself and what you're capable of doing. And I think for so much of my life, personally and professionally, I didn't have a lot of confidence in what I was doing. I needed outside opinion to tell me that things were going well. I didn't trust my own view of things. And so I think working on myself and helping to develop that confidence is something that I wish I would have done decades, almost 15 years ago. And it would have really helped, because I remember seeing marketing leaders that I would work for that I would really respect, and how well they could, I don't want to say defend, because like Pranav was saying, you don't necessarily, but sometimes you have to. They would just either present something with such conviction or defend something so intelligently well against the CEO, and I just was in awe of that. I was like, I don't know if I could do that. I would probably just okay, you're right, it didn't work. It's all right, let's try something else. So I think that's probably that's for me, I think one of the bigger learnings.
Love that. Pranav?
Yeah, I was thinking about what the biggest mistake is. I was leading a product marketing team before starting Paramark, product marketing and customer marketing. And, it was a larger organization. There was a lot to sort of unpack and repack. It was a couple of companies got acquired. It was a complicated, messy sort of situation that we found ourselves And it was really, really hard to define the role of the product marketing team in that environment. Okay. It was just like, everyone was like, yeah, I don't know what these people do. It was like, just went on a listening tour, all that fun stuff. And when I ended that role and I decided to quit and like start Paramark, I realized one thing. The hardest thing for that team was not having a clear tie to a metric that was important to the CFO, to the CRO, to the CEO. And you'll notice I didn't say the CMO. The CMO obviously cared and understood product marketing really well. But if you can't tie your activity and output to an outcome that the business cares about, nothing else matters. You can have lots of great kumbaya sessions and, hey, we love sales and sales loves product marketing. Nothing matters if you are not driving quantified outcomes to a business metric. So that's my lesson, is like, I wish I could have changed that earlier in the process and we didn't get there fast enough. Yeah.
Love it. Alrighty, Megan, you're on the spot.
I'm on the spot. I don't know if I have a good story, but I hopefully have a good perspective, which is, for me, my either failures or my advice is not getting overly stuck in the spreadsheets of marketing. That was super important. That was a tough one for me. It's my comfort place. I want the numbers to be perfect. But it's about internal relationships. Remember the humanity of it all. We're in a creative profession and we need to be able to be creative. And so make the spreadsheets work in that respect. But that's been a failure of mine, is, trying to over-engineer the whole model. We like that word today, the whole model of it all. It's important to make sure that you build that trust internally, but you got to take bets. And I think, to Jason's point, like, trust your gut, trust yourself, and try things and be ready to fail. Like, failure is a good thing. You want to fail often.
All right. Great perspective. I'll let you off the hook, but you were just across like the world. What was the craziest travel story that you can share from your international roadshow in India and Singapore?
I don't have a crazy, it wasn't a crazy travel adventure, if you will. It was 95% working inside of a hotel, if you will. But it was a wonderful trip. And again, I think as marketers, we don't oftentimes get to see our work come to life in a physical way. And so that was a really magical moment, especially post-COVID. Did something crazy happen? You're putting so much pressure on me.
What was your favorite meal?
Like a 30-hour travel day, and you had to go right into a meeting. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's true. I guess that could be considered crazy. I do that to myself, though. That's on me. Food was the highlight, though, for sure. Crazy travel. Again, I said I didn't get sick, and that was the highlight for me. I was eating everything that I could and loved every bit of it. I'm a big fan of Indian food, and then all of the various cuisines of Singapore.
Did you do chili crab in Singapore or no?
I did, yes. And it came with the gloves and the bib. So that was a treat. I appreciated that.
I'm curious. Whoa, what is this? I haven't eaten lunch yet, but I doubt that I'm going to be able to find that here.
Yeah, it was
chili crab, Mark. If you ever go to Singapore or Southeast Asia, it is the thing to try. It's basically just a crab with chili, and you get like these little. Did you get the bows, the buns?
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, you dip it in the sauce. It was excellent. Anything, in my opinion, that comes with a bib and gloves to eat is going to be an excellent meal.
That's a pretty good life rule to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Well, this was a blast recording with you all. I know I definitely learned a ton, so I'm excited to get this out on the podcast. So thank you for recording with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Seth. Thanks for having us.
This was great.